to tell you about a story that happened decades ago, and that the story behind this evil place in Idaho will make your blood turn cold. Warning, the following story is not for the faint of heart. The terrible crime in Idaho may have happened decades ago, but it still remains to be one of the most disturbing things to happen in their community. It is known that every town has its own unique urban legend, including tales of crime and even murder. Even though the fact that Idaho is commonly seen as a safe place to live, their state definitely has had a handful of disturbing accounts. The crime that happened in Boise murder house is sure to turn your blood cold. Several people even revere this place as a chop house. The reason why it's called that is because several terrible things that went down here so many years ago. The house is still standing today, and walking by it, you may not realize anything out of the ordinary about it, except that it's old and hasn't aged. However, once you hear about the crime that took place here, you'll never want to look at that house the same way again. The story goes that there were 3 men that got into a fight on that summer night. One of the men, Preston Murr, was shot in the shoulder as a result. He attempted to run away from the other 2 men. Murr ran up to a neighbor's house and banged on the door. The neighbor did not come out right away, but he did call the police. Unfortunately, the police didn't even show up until way later, after it was way too late. The blood gave police reason to obtain search warrant and enter the house where the neighbor heard an altercation come from. Once the police were inside, they discovered the horrid crime scene of Murr's murder. The 2 men had dragged Murr back after he escaped and fatally shot him to death. Then, in an act of excessive brutality, they dismembered the body in order to dispose of it. The men drove out to Brownlee Reservoir near the Oregon and Idaho border to dispose of the body. The body wasn't recovered in the reservoir until a week later. The 2 men, Daron Cox and Daniel Rogers, were immediately apprehended and charged with murder. The body wasn't recovered in the reservoir until a week later. However, the 2 men, Daron Cox and Daniel Rogers, were immediately apprehended and charged with murder. To this day, nobody knows why the confrontation between the 3 men even broke out. The details of it are so murky about why Murr was gruesomely murdered. Even according to court documents, the 3 men had been hanging out earlier that evening trying to locate Rogers' recently stolen guns. They drove around Boise trying to find the apartment of the person they believed stole the guns. The trio returned to the house on Linden Street around midnight, and that is when the deadly altercation broke out. Both Cox and Rogers went to trial for the murder of Preston Murr. Cox was given a lesser sentence because he complied with police and gave details about the murder. Overall, he spent 6 years in prison before being released. The jury deemed Rogers guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in bars. Right now, he's currently serving his life term at Idaho Correctional Center and was last denied parole back in 2005. Over the several years, a lot of people have lived in the murder house. Several people rented out during the 90s, and the house even spent time as a Boise State University frat house in the 2000s. Although there haven't been any official paranormal incidents that have occurred in the house, most people do agree that there is something extremely unsettling about the house, especially in the basement.